Welcome. So pleased that you are able to join us today. Um, my name is Namal De Silva, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer at the American Bird Conservancy. And it's my pleasure to host Virginia and Freya. I'm so pleased to announce this new partnership between the American Bird Conservancy and Birdability. And this is the first of 6 webinars about supporting birders with disabilities and other health concerns. So please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, one reason why this topic is important to you. And we'll get started. So some logistics to get us started. Automated captions are available for this webinar. You can turn them on by clicking on the up arrow next to the closed caption CC icon and clicking on show subtitles. You can drag the captions wherever you'd like on the screen. We're honored to have Kathy Silvern and Melissa Hines providing American Sign Language ASL interpretation today. We've adjusted the audience view to grid. We've adjusted the audience view to grid view so that you'll be able to see them. They'll be switching off throughout the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on the ABC and Birdability YouTube channels. Please submit your questions using the Q&A box. We'll answer as many of those as we can during the question and answer period at the end of the conversation. So this is, the conversation is for 1 hour, but we do have an extra 30 minutes just in case there's a lot of discussion or a lot of questions. So feel free to stay on after the formal part of the interview for that. I'm going to share a little bit more about Birdability and the American Bird Conservancy for those of you who are new to our organizations. American Bird Conservancy, which is shortened to ABC, was founded in 1994 with the mission of protecting wild birds across the Americas. We work with lots of partners throughout the Americas, the whole Western Hemisphere, to halt extinctions, to safeguard habitats, and to build capacity for bird conservation. We want more people to enjoy and care for birds and the environment, including people who have historically been ignored within the conservation field. Birdability is a new organization that uses education, outreach, and advocacy to make the birding community and the outdoors more welcoming, inclusive, safe, and accessible for everybody. Birdability focuses on people with mobility challenges, blindness or low vision, chronic illness, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, and those who are neurodivergent, deaf, or hard of hearing, or who have other health concerns. That's a lot. In addition to current birders, Birdability strives to introduce birding to people with disabilities and other health concerns who are not yet birders. So welcoming new people in is what both of our organizations are about. I'm going to go on and introduce our speakers. And then I'm going to hand it over to Freya, who will be asking Virginia questions about birding with mobility challenges. So our guest and the founder of Birdability is Virginia Rose. She fell off a horse at the age of 14, and this fall resulted in a spinal cord injury. She's been a manual wheelchair user ever since. She began birding 17 years ago, and she discovered her best self in nature. As a retired high school English teacher, she's passionate about birding, bringing joy and sharing the empowerment and sense of community that she found in birding and being out in nature with those who have mobility and other accessibility challenges. Freya McGregor is our host. She is the Birdability coordinator and will serve as the interviewer for all 6 of these webinars. Freya is an occupational therapist, and her experience with modifying the physical and cultural environments, with adapting tasks and equipment, and with developing public health programs helps guide Birdability's overall approach. Her background is in blindness and low vision services. Finally, Erica Sanchez Vasquez, who is not on screen right now, but is on that slide that is in front of us right now, works with within ABC's communications team and has done a lot of the work that enables us to bring you this webinar series. Erica's background is in journalism and media within education and environmental organizations, and she'll be behind the scenes monitoring the chat and helping out as needed. So with that, I'm going to transition us over to Freya, and I'll be monitoring the chat throughout. So feel free to ask me questions as well.
Thanks so much, Namal and Erica and the American Bird Conservancy. Hi, everyone. My name is Freya McGregor. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And as Namal said, I'm the Birdability Coordinator and an occupational therapist. I'm really excited to be here tonight. This program has been a long time in the making, so it's really exciting to kick it off as part of celebrating Birdability Week, which is another program that we're really thrilled about, which will be October 18 to 24. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more or participating in any of those events, they haven't been announced yet, that's coming next week. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Birdability, or sign up to our newsletter, which you can do from our website, birdability.org. There's a lot more coming there. I'm coming to you tonight from the ancestral home of the Muskogee Nation, many of whom were forcibly removed by the US government to Indian Territory, but there are still a lot of Muskogee people living in Alabama today. So I would like to start tonight by extending my gratitude and appreciation for their past and continuing stewardship of the lands that I live, work, and go birding on. I'm really thrilled that we have closed captions and ASL interpreters tonight. These are two things that sometimes cost more money, but help a lot of people participate. And that's what we're all about. We're all about inclusion. And sometimes it costs more and sometimes it takes more effort, but we value that. And we're really glad that we have that support too from the American Bird Conservancy. I also want to mention that throughout this series, we're going to hear from a really awesome group of birders who all have different access challenges, but we do not claim that these folks will include every identity of birder or person with an access challenge. And disability is diverse in many ways, including within the same access challenge or diagnosis. So please keep that in mind, and that the views expressed in these interviews are of the person and no one else. Some of it may apply to other people, but we're not claiming that we're not talking for everybody here at all. That's part of what makes humans so interesting. So let's get into it. Virginia, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Freya. Thank you, Namal. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and where you are and maybe how you got into birding?
Okay, sure. I am in Austin, Texas, and I started birding about 17-ish years ago. You know, people ask me, how'd you get into birding? And I'm still having a hard time pinpointing exactly what it was, but I did have a grandmother who birded well into her 90s, right here in Austin, Texas. I remember the binoculars around her neck, and actually she gifted me her Peterson's guide, one of the, it's not the first, the second or third maybe edition. So anyway, probably got some of it from her.
Sure. And what is it? So for those who don't know, Virginia and I work really closely with each other, setting up a brand new nonprofit. Birdability became a nonprofit just this year, and we've spent many hours on Zoom talking about nonprofit things and disability and birding and inclusion and all kinds of things. So Virginia, I know that you talk a lot about the different joys that birding brought you. I was wondering if you might share with us a little bit about which of those joys that birding keeps bringing you back to. What is it that keeps bringing you back to birding?
I think I might just start with the joy, the moment when I realized that I needed to make sure that other people who had mobility challenges, because that's how I started. I wasn't thinking about the whole rest of the world like you were, Freya. But my first thought at this moment when I was sitting in the woods and I was totally enveloped and I was all by myself and I was listening to the bird song, and I was just struck with the wonder of being able to be in the woods by myself safely listening to birds. And I just thought, this is my best self, and I've got to make sure everybody can get here who may not know that they can do it. And so that's really how Birdability started.
But what is it about birding that makes you want to keep birding?
So when we're talking about the joys, definitely it is going to the new birding sites and finding the new birds, finding the old birds, having a chance to sit and study birds, realizing that I can be on a birding path for 4 hours at a time without even realizing it. And just the time goes by so beautifully and so peacefully. So that's definitely part of the joy.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And historically, there has been a bit of an image, I think, of a lot of birders who the way that birding is done is by walking down a trail, checking birds off a list. But we know that there are many more ways to enjoy wild birds than just that one. How do you bird?
I think I would be described as a slow birder, in that I want to check every single tree and bush on either side of me before I go farther down the trail. But there's so many little niches and places where they can be, and I want to listen to everything. And so I am definitely not running down the trail. I'm listening down the trail. So as soon as I hear something, I stop, and I usually don't leave until I figure out what it is. That's one way.
Sure. Yeah. And so speaking of moving down the trail, could you tell us a little bit about your disability and how long it has created an access challenge? I think we heard a little bit of that from Namal in the introduction, but also what kind of activities are challenging for you in your everyday life because of your disability?
Right. So I'm a paraplegic. That means I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I have a fairly strong upper body and shoulders and arms to move my wheelchair around pretty well still after 48 years. But when I'm wheeling and when I'm birding, I'm having to keep my eyes on the path in front of me and make sure that I'm not going off the path or off a cliff or off the trail. And at the same time, try to keep my eyes, looking for the birds. I also, because I'm having to have my hands on the wheels when I'm wheeling, I can't really bird. Well, let me say it this way. I can listen while I'm wheeling, but I can't use my binoculars while I'm wheeling. And I think the walking people have an advantage there, as I feel like they can kind of walk while they're birding. So definitely being in a wheelchair and birding has its hardships, but it's also got its advantages, because I think I see things that other people don't see. Like I always get the olive sparrow first, and I always get the ovenbird first, and I always get those towhees because they're all underneath the bushes. They're closer to my eyes.
Yeah, sure. You have a different, like not a figurative different perspective, but like a literal different perspective.
Right.
And folks standing with you. Yeah, I know I've been birding with Virginia once, no, not once, more than once, but in one period of time in August this year, we met up for the first time in person on our way to the Southeast Arizona Birding Festival, which was really cool. And that was my first experience of birding with someone who was using a manual wheelchair, and it was definitely really cool to see what you kind of ran into before I did, or making sure that we were both finding birds together, but differently. I felt like it. We sort of helped each other out sometimes with because we were looking at different places and paying attention to different things. So
I don't know if I really, I don't know if I really answered that question that you just asked me. Did I?
Well, the question I asked, so I was thinking about your everyday life, not particularly about birding. So if there's something about using a manual wheelchair that that's challenging in your everyday life.
Well, let's see. I've been in the chair for so long that it's hard for me to really stop and recognize what is and what isn't. But I guess I would just say that everything takes me a little bit longer to do, although I wouldn't admit that for 47 years. And I have a tendency to think that I'm not disabled at all. And so I will just run through my life thinking I can reach everything, I can carry everything, I can push everything. And of course I can't, but I can do an awful lot. And I think one of the things that makes me an explorer is that the empowerment I get from figuring out how to do things is enormous. And so I may find myself in a situation and I don't really know what I'm going to do. I'm like, like I'm really good at going down a trail for miles and miles. And I don't stop and realize, oh, now I got to come back up that. So the figuring out of being in a wheelchair, I think is a really interesting experience. And I think it's made me incredibly strong and it makes me feel like I can do whatever I need to do.
And really good at problem solving, it sounds like.
Yes.
Well.
Oh, absolutely. Because you want to do the thing. And so you spend time figuring out, okay, what do I need to do in order to do it? So a good example for that, just really quickly, is that I was having trouble with cactus thorns in my wheels and I would get flat tires. And so I said, no more air-filled tires, although they're nice. So now I have tubeless tires, no more flat tires.
Perfect. Awesome. And speaking of flat tires, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a tour of your wheelchair, because there might be folks who are watching or listening tonight who aren't really familiar with manual wheelchairs.
Right. Okay, tell me if I'm in the right place. I don't know how much you can see. I think I need to lower my screen a little bit.
Yeah, maybe just a little. Yeah, that's better.
Can you see?
Pretty well.
I'm gonna lower it a little more. Bear with me. Okay,
Yeah,
that's better. All right, so this is a manual chair. I want you to notice how low the back is on my chair. I'm lucky that I have enough upper body strength to have a lower back, because please notice the amount of space and what I call mobility I have behind me. And when you're in a wheelchair, space is a very valuable commodity. Notice also I don't have any arms on my chair. And again, it's because I want to optimize the space that I have on my lap, and for whatever reason I might need this space. I also, you might see the backpack that I carry on the back of my wheelchair, and that is a lifesaver. I don't know how anyone ever in a wheelchair gets around without a backpack. And then I also, I don't think you can see it from here, but right underneath my knees, I have a little pouch. It's a zip pouch, and in it I carry all the things that a woman would carry in her purse, including lipstick.
Perfect, thank you. Oh, and by the way, before we keep going with questions, I was wondering if you could give us a little demonstration of a wheelie.
Oh, the wheelie, the famous wheelie. Okay, this I have to quickly say, for those of you who are really, really good at wheelies, please don't judge me too harshly. I'm 62 years old and I'm not as good at it as I used to be. So here we go. I might have to.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, perfect.
Am I good?
Yeah. Hey.
Wheelie. Turn it all over.
Thank you very much. So why is a wheelie helpful for you? What does that allow you to do, that skill?
Wheelie is just such an important skill, because when you are wheeling through the grass and you want to get back on a sidewalk, you'll need to pop a little wheelie up the front to get back up it. On the other hand, if you are coming down, like when you and I were birding together and we came down that kind of a steep sidewalk, and the sidewalk was bumped up a little bit, I had to pop a wheelie over that in order to not end up like a wheelbarrow pitched out on the sidewalk. I also do wheelies when I'm going through turf. And, you just get on your back wheels and you just stay on your back wheels, because I have casters, little casters. And the little casters are great for all kinds of urban use, but they're not great when you're out in the wilderness, because they'll catch on everything. So to be able to do a wheelie and keep it going through rough terrain just enables you to get other places. Same with ruts. You have to be able to do a wheelie to get around ruts and roots, and sometimes gravel.
Sure. And for those of people who don't know what a caster is, do you want to explain real quick just what a...
Sure. The casters are the little wheels in the front. And I actually was going to say something later about tips for people who are birders and are in wheelchairs, that the smarter wheels are going to be the bigger ones, obviously, with more tread and with a wider tire, so that you can wheel more easily through all kinds of different terrain. But that would mean that I would have to have either 2 wheelchairs or 2 sets of mechanics to take the casters off and put the other ones on.
Sure. Thanks for the wheelchair 101. I should mention here, just in case you aren't familiar with wheelchairs and people who might use wheelchairs, there's lots and lots of different kinds of wheelchairs for lots of different reasons. Lots of different people with lots of different disabilities and other health concerns use wheelchairs, and not every wheelchair user is the same at all. It's a really diverse group of people. There's power wheelchairs that are driven with a battery. There's manual wheelchairs. There's people who sometimes walk and sometimes use a wheelchair. There's all kinds of folks. So again, this is not meant to be representative of every kind of wheelchair user. But yeah, thanks for the wheelchair and the wheelie demonstration.
Sure.
And yeah, not everyone who uses a wheelchair can do a wheelie either.
Right. Right.
So we sort of spoke a little bit already about how being a manual wheelchair user impacts your ability to go birding. And we sort of talked a little bit about your problem solving that you have to do. I was wondering if you might share anything more about that, like how you work around the kind of obstacles that you might run into when you're out birding.
Right. I would say that when it comes to birding by myself, I tend to be a little more cautious about going off the sidewalks or off the paved roads. But generally, when I'm with a group and they are going to be wandering off, for instance, on a path that's not doable for me, I might just poke around where I am quite happily. And just when I find that I'm getting into a path where there are a lot of roots or there are a lot of obstacles in there, I try to avoid that, but then do the wheelies that I have to do to manage my way out of it. I'm also very mindful of carrying with me in my backpack every single thing I'm going to need. So it's like Boy Scout, it's like everything I might need. I have scissors, I have plastic bags, it's like Mary Poppins bag. It's whatever you think you might need, I have it. So
sure. Yeah. Be prepared. And I wanted to ask you too about, I happen to know that you have a really cool piece of adaptive birding equipment, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Right. That was such a great experience. Thank you for asking me that. When I would go birding with all of my friends, by the way, they were all walking friends. There were no people in wheelchairs ever. And so the guys would all, and the women would all jump out of their cars to put their scopes up, and there'd be like this scope line. And, you know, I would wheel up, but I didn't have a scope because scopes were hard. They were hard to manage. My walking friends always tried to help me with the scope, but trying to get a tripod around a wheelchair and get on the bird before it's gone is like difficult. And so I finally decided I'm going to get a scope. And so I bought a scope, and then I wheeled into Precision Camera and I said, you guys, we need to get this scope attached to this wheelchair. And so they did. They came up, and took them 15 minutes. They totally geeked out on it and they loved it. And it's like a steel elbow, really, with a nice little bend in the middle and a G clamp that goes on the right side of my wheelchair. And it ends up with the scope right under my eye, like immediately under my eye. And my first experience with the group was when I was able to get out of my van with my scope already in place, and I could line up with all the guys, and I could look at the same bird at the same time as everybody else did. And I nearly cried. And I said, I'm in the scope line. And everybody was just like, yes, you are. It was a very poignant moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's so cool that the adaptive equipment sort of allowed you to participate in a way that you kind of could a little bit before, but not sort of fantastically. So that's really awesome. I'm just going to stick in the chat. We have photos of Virginia's scope and the components that, oh, not the scope, the wheelchair mount for the scope, and the components that make it up on our website under adaptive birding equipment. So that's just in the chat. Oh, no, it's not. That went, here we go. Try that again. There it is. As well as we have photos and descriptions of other adaptive birding equipment that we know of, that people have told us about, and things that I know about. And if you use any adaptive birding equipment, we would love to know about it so that we can share it with more people in case it's helpful for them, because there might be a bunch of folks listening who would love a wheelchair mounted scope. So yeah, that's super cool.
Freya, can I say something really quickly? Because I think it matters. What was happening by me not being able to be part of the scope line is I was missing out on some camaraderie. I call it scope camaraderie, where people are talking into the scope and they're all hearing each other, and it's just an important community time, and I wasn't getting to be a part of it. And so that's what I want us to all be thinking about.
Yeah, inclusion right there, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that in.
Sure.
So speaking of other people, I was wondering if you might share a little bit about help. And so I know a lot of people, well-meaning people, want to help others who have visible disabilities. It's also especially worth mentioning that not every disability is visible, but folks with visible disabilities, often people want to help them. What is the best kind of help for you to receive from someone else? And what would you want folks who are offering you help to know?
That's a great question. I think the very first thing I would say is that I think it's always right to offer help. And I think that it's also right for a person who needs help to ask, even though we may not want to. It's still important for us to be working together that way. And if the seated user, if the person you're asking says, no, thank you, then you say, okay, let me know later if it comes up that you need some help, I'll be happy to. And then that's perfectly acceptable. If the person says, yes, I do need some help, don't jump in and start, figuring it out on your own. The first thing you should do is ask them, how can I help you? Please direct me. And then that seated person will be able to give you some advice on how to do it.
Yeah, sure. We were at an outing together, and I know you wanted a hand getting up a curb. There wasn't a curb cut. And someone who was trying to be helpful, you'd asked for help, they'd offered help, but they sort of just grabbed you by your backrest and tipped you back so far. I was like, whoa. And I think your face was a little bit like, because they tipped you back so very far. And that, see, it looked to me like it was a little disconcerting for you. So letting the person be the guide in the help.
Yes. And I would also say that for people who are in wheelchairs and might need help, but they don't want to take you up on it, they may, I would just say their answer may be a little gruff, but I would encourage the wheelchair user to say, instead of being gruff, no, but thank you so very much. I really appreciate your help, because we want to keep everybody communicating on a happy, useful level.
Sure. I guess you wouldn't want to put off a would-be helper who doesn't offer help next time to someone who really, really does need it.
Right.
Right.
Cool.
Well, thank you.
Let me say one other thing about help. I'm not easily helpable, but if my sunglasses or my hat fly off my head and go down a hill and I can't reach it, will you please go get my stuff without me having to, make myself too miserable asking.
What about doors? I know doors are an interesting thing. Folks wanting to hold doors open for people in wheelchairs to be helpful.
Yes.
What are your thoughts and experiences on that one?
Yes, and that's an interesting question, because up until about 5 years ago, I was in charge of opening my own door. And so I did not want anyone, if they were coming through, fine. But if they weren't, I didn't want anyone to run to the door and open it for me. That was a comment. Somehow that was a comment on my ability. And so, but now that my shoulders aren't quite what they used to be, now I'm very good about saying, thank you for opening the door, and please hold the door. And, I think you just get to a point and you kind of just have to read the person. You just have to read the person. And if he or she isn't making eye contact with you, that probably means they're not interested in help. But if they are making eye contact with you, that might mean they may be open to help.
Sure. And speaking of, so what I think I heard you just say then was something about kind of accepting help and accepting your kind of your functional capacity, which is a super occupational therapy term, but like, what you can do and what you can't do, and no one can do everything. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about language, and this sort of that ties into this a little bit. And we know that language is really important, and it's always evolving. We don't really say thou very much anymore. And so we want to make sure that we're using language that's welcoming to folks and doesn't sound outdated or offensive. And having spoken with you a lot about this over the last year and a half, I was wondering if you might share with folks your thoughts on the word disability, and if you identify as disabled.
Yeah. So when Freya and I first started talking about inclusive language, she kind of came in like, well, handicap is not the word people use anymore. And I'm like, she said, disabled is the word they use in Australia, and like she was the boss of that. And I was like, hold on, you're a walking person talking to a person in a wheelchair. So step back a bit. And let me tell you that I feel like I am the most able person I know. And in some ways, when I hear the word disability or disabled, I'm like, I'm not at all a disabled person. I do not feel that way. And so I have the same reaction to the word disabled that a lot of people have to the word handicapped. And so that's the interesting thing about language. And, the same with the word walk, because, the popular thing now is to not use the word walk when you're talking about a birding outing, that you should call it an outing or an event and not use the word walk. And so Freya was explaining all this to me. Freya, a walking person, talking to me, a person in a wheelchair, that I wasn't to use the word walk anymore, that I was to use the word events. And I'm like, no, I'm not, no. So language is like all the other disabilities, right? It's all variable.
Yeah, I'm going to caveat that. I think when we were talking about what words we should use as birdability, but a big message out of that is that it's not up to us how someone else identifies, and people are allowed to identify as they would like, and we can't say that that's wrong. So I think that's a big take-home message there. We do have a link on our website in case folks wanted to check out about inclusive language use. It's supposed to be a starting place, as we've just heard. Different people have different opinions on different words, and I know a lot of folks who view the word handicapped as out of date. I also know a lot of people who, different communities, different age groups, people from different cultures, there's so many variables and everyone's different. So I would encourage you to check that out if you would like a starting place. But if someone says, no, that's not how I go, then let them be the boss of that. We're all learning, myself included. We're all learning, and all we can do is the best we can do until we learn to do better, and then we can do better. So thank you for sharing about that. So speaking of walking people, what would you like other walking people, other than me, walking people to know about birding with someone who uses a manual wheelchair, and what can they do to be sure to be welcoming and inclusive of you?
Okay. Well, I made a list of like 23 things, so I know we will not get to all those things, but I think the very first point I would make is that when you are in the presence of seated people and you're a walking person, it often happens that the walking people are having a conversation, and remember, that's 2.5, 3 feet above a seated person. And so often the walking people's conversation is excluding you. And I don't think it's meant to exclude you, but what walking people need to work to try to remember is that the eye contact and the conversation needs to include the seated people as well. And you have to be, I think, at first a little intentional about that to make sure that everyone feels included. I guess I would say that's the first thing, and that needs to happen in a birding situation or otherwise, clearly. I would also say that, again, every disability is different, but I do not like for anyone to make a fuss. I don't want to ever make a scene. And so it's best if you can just operate, in sort of in a subtle way when you're trying to help be inclusive. And, Freya and I talk about how do we be inclusive without, how do we let the person know that they're included without spotlighting them? And so I would just say that oftentimes when birding leaders when they're starting off their trip, they'll meet in a parking lot or something. And I would just say, make sure that morning meetup is fully accessible, that just be mindful of the obstacles that might keep a seated person from being able to get up right where everybody else is. I would also say that it's pleasing for walking people to want to help. They want to. And so we've touched on this briefly, but I would just say, particularly when you're birding and you're on a trail, if the person in the wheelchair is hanging back, there's no need for that person to be attended by other walking people. And I think sometimes people feel like, no, I don't want that person in a wheelchair to be left behind or left alone. And, I understand that, but sometimes it's intrusive for a walking person to insist that he or she be accompanied. So those are just little things to think about. I would also say that when you're going down a path with a person in a wheelchair, he or she is going to be looking for the flattest, driest, cleanest path. And so what that means is if you're walking side by side, know that the person in the wheelchair is watching for that cleanest, straightest path. And that means that you may need to be looking ahead and moving out of that way. If you might need to change tracks is what my friends say. And it's always endearing when I'm wheeling with my friends and they know me really well. And so they already know to move over at this certain point because that's where Virginia's going to go. They just already know. I would also say that it's particularly endearing when I see walking people in front of me and or behind me using their feet to kind of clear debris. People just start to become more mindful when they're walking and they just start like shoveling the stuff out of the way. It's really endearing, I think. And I would also say, if you are seeing a bird, I think the best way to help a seated person see the bird, if they aren't seeing it, is to maybe either get behind the seated person or at least get some idea about the way in which our vision is going to be affected. And so that way you can get a better idea of where I am in relation to the bird. The other thing, and walking people probably do this with everybody, which is to help them get on the bird, is to be looking for a clearer spot. So a lot of times my friends will say, Virginia, come over here. There's no brush or there's no trees. So just being mindful of a lower field of view. And also along that same line, sometimes people walk in front of wheelchair users when we're birding because the wheelchair user is below that walking person's line of view. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like when a walking person is walking in front of me, he or she may be looking at all the other heads above me and not being mindful of where mine is in relation to looking. So just be looking for everybody's view when you're moving around in front of people.
Yeah, thank you. And for all those other things that you listed, they're not going to go to waste.
No.
We're really looking forward to creating a resource for our website that has all of Virginia's tips for walking folks who are birding with someone who's a manual wheelchair, and all of your tips for walking folks. If you're a manual wheelchair user too, we'd really love for you to share your ideas and experiences with us. At the end of this, if you're watching live, at the end of this webinar, there's this little survey and it'll have some questions there. And we'd really love to hear your experiences so that we can anonymously incorporate that into this resource that anyone can get hold of off our website. The other thing this resource will have, it'll have tips and tricks for walking folks to be more inclusive of wheelchair users who are birding with them, as well as tips and tricks for maybe new wheelchair users or maybe long time wheelchair users who are new to birding. And so I was wondering if you could share with us maybe your top 3, maybe your top 5 tips for other wheelchair users and who are birding.
So what I'm thinking about is like, let's see, can you rephrase that question? Sorry.
Have you got any tips or tricks for folks who also use a manual wheelchair?
Yeah.
That you'd like to share in case it's helpful for them when they're birding?
Thank you. Well, I guess I would start with the parking lot. I'm seeing in the chat some comments about parking spaces. So I would start with the parking. And, you need to be a little more brazen as a person, in a wheelchair. Whenever I cannot find a parking space for a van, because, my van has 8-foot clearance, needs 8-foot clearance on the passenger side, and sometimes that's really hard to find. So I don't think anything anymore about parking across 2 spots or 3 if I need them. And I have a little cone with a little wheelchair insignia sticker on it. And I fly out of my van and I put my cone down, sort of like, bring it. And so I would recommend that for any wheelchair users. If you need more space, take it upon yourself to get more space. That doesn't mean we can be happy about it, but do what you need. And then other tips, let me just go back to the backpack very quickly. Everything that you can carry in your backpack might be, your field guides and your water bottles and your compass and your coffee cup. And so all the things that you need so that you don't have to go back to the van or ask anyone for anything, God forbid. And so other things would be to make sure that you're keeping yourself hydrated, and that you are able to get shade when you need it. I know that lots of people who are wheelchair users sometimes have different needs when it comes to hydration and sun and shade.
And I know you have one about your breaks as well, when you find a bird.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So when I'm wheeling down the path, I might be wheeling down the path, talking or whatever, and then I'll stop. I'll come to a quick stop. And this is when I should have told all the walking people behind me to pay attention, because all these people are going to like stack up a bit behind me. But I will stop and I'll immediately go to my right brake and click it, so that when I put my binoculars up, I'm not continuing to wheel away down the sidewalk and miss the bird. So yeah, the brakes, it's just safety mainly.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And so we're getting towards the end of the main part of the questions, but before we jump into the Q&A session, but before I finish up, I wanted to ask you a little bit about intrusive questions. I know a lot of folks with disabilities and other health concerns get asked by probably well-meaning, curious people questions that are really not appropriate and not okay to be asked, especially if you're just out trying to go birding or, on a quick run to the supermarket or something. And so these questions can feel really obnoxious and intrusive. Have you ever been asked any intrusive questions that made you feel kind of invaded upon or uncomfortable?
Oh, in 48 years, I've been asked every single question you can imagine. Of course, I say that. There will be another one tomorrow. Anyway, and at different times I've handled it in different ways. I feel though, as I've aged, that my job more and more as a wheelchair user is that of ambassador. And so by that, I don't want to waste any opportunity I have to help a person understand what it is to be disabled. And so what that means is when they ask me questions, like the one I get a lot is, what happened to you? In just those words. And what I want to do is not make the person feel bad. I don't want to shame anybody for approaching a person in a wheelchair. Instead, I would say, well, have you got about 30 years to talk about it? I try to immediately introduce humor, because that takes all the awkwardness out of it. And that means I assume a lot of the responsibility, Freya, for those kinds of interactions. And I think that's important. You know that I've always said that. I have occasionally had questions like, well, how do you go to the bathroom? Or, things like that. And then I always turn that into something funny. I don't answer, but I always turn it into something funny, just as a way to put the person at ease, because I don't want them to be feeling bad, but also to let them know that they don't need to ask that question.
Yeah. And so I have with me a red flag.
Yes.
I'm not sure that this is a standard thing, but my sister used to tell me secrets in high school, and she'd say, "That's red flagged," which was meant to indicate that I should not repeat this to anybody. And so questions like, how do you go to the bathroom? That's not an appropriate question to ask someone
Right.
you're birding with. There might be times when you know someone really well, or they've invited you to ask them questions or something, and that's different. But anything that you wouldn't ask someone who's non-disabled,
Mm-hmm.
who you've just met, you probably shouldn't ask someone who has a disability or other health concern. It's not your business.
Yeah.
Especially if they're just trying to go birding in peace. But I have a couple of these invasive questions, and before I ask them, I'm just going to share that I did talk to Virginia ahead of time about these questions, and she did give me permission to ask them in this public place, but they are all red flagged. So here's my red flag to remind you, these are not questions to be asking someone. So you said you had a spinal cord injury. What level is that? And what does that even mean?
Right. Yeah, it's a little difficult to answer a question like that because it's so, medical. Like, again, I would have to answer it in a humorous way, but it's probably not the right question to be asking.
Yeah, totally. And what about if someone knew that because of your spinal cord injury, you mentioned earlier that you it's waist down, basically. So if someone knew that and they said something like, "So you really can't feel or move your legs at all?"
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Oh, I always end up feeling bad for them. I don't know. That's my response.
I think too, maybe this is another guiding thing with invasive questions. If it's something that you can go home and Google it. Like, this person in front of you is not your resource unless they've invited that. And here's another one. How do you even manage in your everyday life?
Well, I would in earnest try to answer that question. I think I'm not a good red flags person, but really, I think your idea, Freya, is right about if you wouldn't ask a non-disabled person, then maybe it's not appropriate. And you know what I would recommend? Instead of asking those kinds of questions, maybe ask the kinds of questions that are more like positive questions, like, ooh, what is the best way for you to see a bird? Or what is the best way for you to help other people see a bird? Just those sorts of positive, curious, but not invasive questions. Mm-hmm. Right.
Sort of questions like that are about how can we make sure that we all have a successful bird outing together, that kind of question.
Right.
Rather than the nitty-gritty of whatever access challenge you have.
Right.
Because that's not really relevant, by the way. If I'm a leader on a bird outing and you've come to this outing with me, it doesn't really matter those nitty-gritty questions of your daily life with the disability. That's not relevant to us having a good time birding together. So,
yeah. Maybe it's more relevant for you to ask the person in a wheelchair about the bird they just saw, or the lizard, or maybe your interactions with that person should have more to do with what you're doing right then, and what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure.
That's good.
Sure. I wonder if it's worth sticking in here. It's not like the person with an access challenge doesn't know they have an access challenge. So it's not, especially if you're leading an outing, it's not that you should completely avoid any mention of it. If it was relevant, then it would be okay for you to ask, hey, Virginia, I know there's some stairs coming up. Let me know if you'd like some help with that, or if we need to problem solve another way around that. Like, that's not invasive, and it's
right,
pretty reasonable. You're allowed to bring it up. It's just that the invasive stuff is not okay.
Right, right. I think also, if I can just throw one quick thing in, if a person in a wheelchair is rather new to birding, I would always recommend giving the field trip leader a call or emailing ahead of time to get more information, to introduce yourself, and to just plan for success. You know, people who have access challenges, I would like to see you do whatever you can to make it successful for everybody. And you know you best.
Yeah, thank you. And so we're about to jump into the Q&A, and I know we're already up to an hour, which, I mean, you and I can talk all day.
Yes.
We know that
Yes.
already.
Yes.
But before we jump into folks' questions, and if you have to go, this is being recorded and will be sent out and available on our YouTube channel and the ABC's YouTube channel. So you won't miss out on this if you want to come back to catch up with these questions. But is there anything else before we get into other folks' questions that you would like to share about birding using a manual wheelchair?
Just that I usually end up seeing all of the birds that everybody sees, even though they had to climb a mountain and back down to get them. So please don't think that a person in a wheelchair is unable to see as many birds, because they may surprise you.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we have one question here. It says, what kind of information about trail conditions and accessibility features do you look for on nature preserve websites? Is there specific information you look for that could help you to determine if a preserve is a good fit for you?
Can you say that again? Sorry, I was reading the chat.
What kind of trail conditions and accessibility information do you look for on nature preserve websites?
All right. Well, I don't usually do any of that. I'm the one who gets in the car and gets to the end of the driveway and says, wait, where am I going? And then I'll Google Arizona or whatever. But once I do get to a trail and I see a map, mainly I'm going to look and see if it's a loop, or if it, like what the distance is. I will look and see where the restrooms are. I will look and see where the water is, if there is water, because I'm going to want a bird over there. And also if there are boardwalks, because I love to be on a boardwalk. Don't we all?
What about trail conditions? Is there anything about like trail surfaces that you prefer or things like that?
For sure. So obviously the easiest trail is a sidewalk, which some people say is not a trail, which I understand. I also love natural dirt trails. Those are really my favorite, natural dirt. They're not as fun in the rain, but they are manageable. I also don't mind what they call a crushed granite surfaces, as long as they've been well maintained and they aren't all full of ruts and erosion. Mulch is impossible, just so you know. Any kind of mulch is impossible. So is sand, so is gravel, and other surfaces that people don't realize, like there's a new surface, like a rubberized surface. It's like the kind of surface that you see in kids' playground areas where they take shredded rubber or something. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work for wheelchairs, but someone didn't get the memo. But
if you want more information, folks, about different accessibility features, I'm just sticking in the chat our webpage about access considerations, and it has a lot more information. It's not specific to manual wheelchair users, it's for anyone with an access challenge and the sorts of things that might be relevant to who and why. By the way, speaking of surfaces, we were birding in Tucson, and I have a dodgy knee, and someone there lent me their manual wheelchair that they had a spare one in the car, and they lent that to me, which really helped because my knee was sick of standing and I was going to have not a fun time. And as well as being so grateful to rest my knee, I learned quite a lot about birding from a manual wheelchair in that brief hour and a half period I think we were out. including the difference in effort on my arms and shoulders and back from when we changed from the concrete path to the hard packed dirt path, which was pretty solid and easy to walk on, but there was obviously a lot more friction on that between the wheels and that surface. And so it was much harder for me, being very unused to using a manual wheelchair, that would have been considered one of the more accessible surface types, but it was noticeably different. So different folks who maybe have chronic fatigue, or maybe they've got shoulder injuries or all kinds of other stuff, as well as being a manual wheelchair user, might have different experiences with that. The next question we have is, please discuss how we can or should talk to a trip leader to set ground rules. I think we being someone with an access challenge, e.g. don't hold back for me, etc.
Right. Well, the way I like to approach trip leaders is not really to sort of set the ground rules, but to mainly say, look, I just want to join you. I want to do whatever I can of the trip. I don't want you to change the itinerary for me. And I also don't want to interrupt other people's participation, but wherever and however this planned trip they already have, I just want you to know that I'm very independent and I'm very happy to bird by myself. I will bird with you guys until you decide to take off on a part of the path that I can't do, and then I'm very, very happy to bird in the parking lot or wherever. So please do not feel like I need to be attended, and we'll cross-check our bird lists when you return.
Yeah, so sort of open and direct sounds like your general approach. But maybe easier for some than others. Not everyone is as confident or as assertive as
exactly
as you sound like you are when you're talking to these leaders. But I wonder if that's a practice thing too. And the more you sort of practice that skill of being assertive, maybe the more it comes easily.
Right. Well, I think part of what we want to do, and I'm not sure really how to articulate this, is we don't want to make a lot of people uncomfortable by our being there, in the same way that we don't want to feel uncomfortable, right? As a disabled person there. Nobody wants to feel uncomfortable. So I think we just keep that in our minds, right? As we're interacting with each other, that nobody wants to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, right. And that might lead me into another resource on our website, which is the Welcoming and Inclusive Birders page, which has some ideas about ways that you might be, as a birder, and especially as a bird outing leader, more welcoming and inclusive of everybody, whether they have access challenges or not. The next question we have is asking you, Virginia, if you take pictures while you're birding, and if so, what camera equipment do you use and where do you post your pictures? Because this person would really love to see any pictures or videos that you have.
I love that question, mainly because I love to give this answer. Really, I'm managing a wheelchair, binoculars, a scope, a coffee cup, an app. You want me to do a camera too? No.
But I bet there are a bunch of folks who use manual or powered wheelchairs who take photos of birds while they're birding.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they're out there. They're more talented than I am.
Well, and of course, because there's so many different ways to enjoy birds, right? And so maybe it would be easier if you were stationary, like checking out a bird feeder, if you wanted to delve into photography. That might be a different story perhaps than doing it while also moving down a trail. But yeah, for sure there'd be all kinds of cool adaptive equipment too, like maybe the mount that you have for your scope, maybe someone could mount a camera on that as well, and that might be a helpful way.
They're doing that already.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
that's already out there.
If there's someone out there who does that, please, if you would be willing for us to share it on our website, please send us a photo. info@birdability.org is my email address, and if you contact us from the website, it'll go straight to my inbox. So it'd be great to be able to share that with more people in case it's helpful for them. Oh, here's a question. If there's any ideas about how to set up bird feeders that can be easily maintained by someone with difficulty walking and standing.
Yes. Now, you might need a walking person to help you get them set up, but the bird feeders in my backyard were put there by walking friends. And what we did is we got a length of chain, small chain, and we ran it through a pulley and attached it to the bird feeder. And then we just pulled the chain down and wrap it around like a lock on the tree. I mean, I put I don't know what to call it, on the tree, like a place where I could wrap the chain. And so I just go out there and I undo the chain. The bird feeder comes down. I fill it. I go back to the chain. I pull the chain back up and then I secure it there. And the only time that's not a good idea is when lightning hits the tree.
That's happened.
That's a whole nother story. Bird feeders came crashing down, sprinkler system came on, garage came up.
Oh,
Anyway,
man. Wow.
Sorry.
It sounds like we need to write up your bird feeder situation for our website so that more people can find that if they want some ideas for their own feeder stations. Yeah. I'm just noticing too, sorry everyone who I know the chat's been really busy. I don't have the skill of watching the chat and also listening and talking well.
Evidenced by me.
So I'm sorry that we've basically been ignoring the chat, but I'm really excited to read the chat after this. But I did see just then really briefly, I said, someone wrote, "This is very inspiring. I sort of had given up."
Yes.
I'm wondering if you might have anything, any kind of empowering thoughts.
Yes, I saw that same chat, Freya, that same note. Thank you. I guess my feeling is that if I can go outside and explore, then I'm going to see something that I never thought I was going to see. I think we sometimes think we know what we're going to see, but there are mysteries every day that are out there waiting for you to see it or waiting for you to hear it. And every time I go out, I come back feeling inspired, empowered, and happy that I have found the place where I am happiest.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 5-mile trek down a trail,
No,
right?
No.
There's no wrong way to enjoy wild birds. So whichever way you can, I'm really pleased that that someone who's come tonight might want to keep birding, because there's so many joys we can get from it, and there's so many different ways we can go birding. So
yes,
hopefully there's a way that you can keep going, because it's just such a cool hobby, and there's so many health and wellness benefits of spending time in nature, and the birding community is so cool if you can tap into that. You've got a great birding community near you, and maybe you bird through webcams at your computer or on virtual field trips, or maybe you participate most with the online birding community through Facebook groups or Instagram. You're still a birder. Like, that's still, as far as I'm concerned, if you enjoy wild birds, that's birding and you're a birder. So hopefully there'll be ways, it may not be the same as it was the way you used to go birding, but hopefully you can still
yes, this is what my family says. You are still birding. You might be birding differently. And I think sometimes hearing it that way helps. I too feel, as I'm aging, that it's not as easy for me to be disabled as I think I am or not. So I do struggle with that a little bit, but I still do take a lot of pleasure by being outside and by myself, honestly. Just spending time looking and listening and knowing that sometimes I try to think, here I am by myself in this forest or in this wherever, and I'm seeing things and hearing things, and that's enough.
Yeah. Oh, someone's asked, how do you transport your wheelchair to your birding locations?
Okay, so I have a van. It's a van where I has an automatic ramp that comes out, and I wheel up the ramp, and from the inside of the car, I transfer to the driver's seat. The driver's seat's remote, so it turns in order to help me make that transfer. And I just tie the wheelchair down with a seat belt. It's very jerry-rigged, and probably illegal. But anyway, so then I drive to wherever I'm going. I find the parking space, and I hit the button, and the ramp comes back out. And I have a lot of stories I've written about not parking very well, and so the ramp leads off a cliff, or the ramp leads into a water-filled ditch, or the ramp leads into a huge rosemary bush or something. The stories go on and on. This is another reason why you need to be out birding. The stories. You will come home with, I'm telling you, every one of you will come home with stories that you didn't know you were going to have that day.
And how do you drive your van?
Oh yeah, that. So the driving is with a hand control, and the hand control comes out from the left side, and I use my right hand on the steering wheel and my left hand on the hand control, and everything else is the same.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry, I'm just having a look at these questions. Oh, here we go. For Bird Festival coordinators or Audubon chapter program coordinators or
Yes.
outing leaders who labelled events as accessible but didn't have very many people show up. I was wondering about your experiences, because I know you've led a lot of accessible bird outings for Travis Audubon in Austin. And is there a word or title that would better describe it and be more inviting?
I just like to use the word accessible, and it may be less that you're not using the right word, and more that your message or your ad isn't getting to the right audience. It may also be that in the description of the event, you could use such words as there are accessible parking spaces, there are accessible restrooms, the trails are wide. In fact, Freya, you have something, don't you, that...
Yep, it's in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, Freya writes all this up. Here's really what happens. I talk and talk and talk, and Freya's like really busy typing it all down and then putting it on our website. Thank you, Freya.
Yeah, so in the chat, there's a link to another one of our web pages about the sort of information that you might include when you're writing bird outing event descriptions. And most of the time, you know, we're going birding at this place, it's easy. Isn't really enough information for folks who need to know if the surface is paved and if it's a mile or is it 5 miles, and is there shade, is there bathrooms? And so if you can include some of this key accessibility information in your outing event description, that might be the signal to the people who might have been wanting to come out with you, who didn't know if they could. Like you've provided everything that they might need to know without them having to ask. And in fact, we would love to see every bird outing ever have this sort of information, whether or not you're specifically hoping that folks with access challenges will show up.
Yeah.
Another thing, Virginia, I know you and I have talked about before with holding accessible outings, is that consistency can be really important, right? Like, not many people might come to the first one, but if you keep going, people will realize you're serious and the word will get out, and, you know, slowly more and more people will start showing up. So if you do it once and it's not a raging success, don't give up, because you'll still see birds or hear birds or find birds. And so
right. And I think it would also be helpful for there to be a write-up after that first accessible walk, so that people who might be a little hesitant can see that, oh, there was an accessible walk. It was successful, there didn't seem to be any issues. And, that I think that's good. Also, I'm noticing that for not just people in wheelchairs, but as people are aging, the importance of benches, and so many of us wouldn't realize that. But, we like to say, of course, that birding accessibility is for everybody, right? As we're aging and grandparents and toddlers and stuff, that the importance of benches becomes more and more glaring, right, Freya? Like for you too.
Yeah, for me with my knee, and folks with chronic pain or chronic fatigue, or people who just want to have a quiet sit. Yeah, benches are really valuable.
So mention benches.
Benches, yeah. Someone else, and now I'm kind of watching the chat a little bit more. Someone else said, and this ties in, is there a network of disabled people in a community where we could advertise our walks? So who have you reached out to in your community, Virginia?
Well, this touches on what I was saying a minute ago about finding your audience. I decided that people in wheelchairs just didn't know about birding. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make a list of all the places I can find people in wheelchairs. I really did that. I'm like, okay, where are they? And so I made a list of where they might be. And the first one was the Spinal Cord Injury Support Group at St. David's here in Austin. And then the Amputee Support Group. And then the Multiple Sclerosis Group. Then the Stroke Group. And then I went to the Easter Seals gym, because there are gyms where all kinds of people who have accessibility challenges go specifically to work out, because the gym has been set up for them. Well, that's the place to find people who are in wheelchairs or have other access challenges. So I put flyers up there and talked to their rec directors. I just made a long list of all the places where I could find people in wheelchairs. And I went and I talked to them, and I got them interested, and now they come with me on walks. I set up monthly birdability walks, and now they come.
Yeah. By the way, we should clarify that even though it's a really great name, if you're not Virginia or me, please don't call your event a birdability walk or a birdability outing. Apparently there are liability issues, and the organization might get sued if something went bad on your event. So that's why we recommend calling it an accessible bird outing or an inclusive bird outing. And there's a whole lot of really cool outings that are happening in October with different Audubon chapters and bird clubs and nature centers and state parks holding accessible bird outings to help us celebrate Birdability Week. So apart from all the other great stuff on this webpage that I'm sticking in the chat, you might get some ideas for names to call your accessible bird outing, because there's some really cool. Adaptive is another one that's used often, adaptive bird outing. So check out that website for some of those ideas. The other thing I stuck in the chat was steps to implement. That's short for steps to implement accessible and inclusive birding in your community. And that has that list that Virginia went through of local disability support groups and other places in your community that you might be able to reach out and invite to come birding with you, because you are hosting accessible outings. That includes bird festivals. Totally.
Yes.
Reaching out and inviting people means they know for sure that you want them to come.
Yes.
And then I did want to give a plug again to Birdability Week. So yeah, that webpage that I just put up will be where we'll announce all the different events coming between October 18 to 24. There'll be online prompts and panels and webinars and a few interactive events. So we're really excited about that, and we hope that you'll join us in celebrating birding with access challenges. And another thing I wanted to mention too is that because we are a nonprofit, donations are really important. So if you are able, and if you feel like this is good work, or you've learned something today, or if you'd just like to support what we're doing and help us continue, any donation is really appreciated. And that link is in the chat as well. So I just need to give us a little plug about that. And also social media at Birdability on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and on YouTube as well. You can find us on YouTube. I think we might have time for one more question before we start wrapping up here. If there are questions that we didn't get to that are kind of specific or you really want us to, please reach out via email or the contact us page on our website, and we'll do our best to get back to you about that. I am planning Birdability Week at the moment, so it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you, but I'm excited to help in any way that I can, or that pass it on to Virginia if it's a question for her. Well, here's a question. A birder in a wheelchair is a different shape from a birder on two legs. Do birds respond differently? Are they less inclined to take flight because they see you as less of a threat?
Well, I don't think I can speak for the birds, but I can tell you that when I sit in one place and don't move, the birds come. So that would probably be the case for anybody, whether they were a disabled or not disabled person sitting in one place. But I haven't seen any difference with the walking people or the people in wheelchairs.
Sure. Yeah, really interesting question though, for sure.
Yeah.
And then one last question. I keep lying, but I'm sorry that we just won't get time for everyone's question. But what has been your best experience in showing someone else a bird?
Oh my gosh, that is so much fun. I think the most fun I had was showing someone in a wheelchair a yellow-breasted chat. And if you know this bird will sit in undercover forever and make a lot of noise, little mutterings for a long, long time. And so it took us quite a long time to find the bird, and just in terms of identifying it. And then this person I was trying to help just couldn't see it. And I'm doing everything I can to help her get on the bird. And she's holding her binoculars, like this. And then finally the chat jumps up, like for just a second, as they're wont to do. And just for a second, and he made one of his like jackhammer noises, how they and she got a big eyeful of that yellow chat. So yeah, they're always so much fun to help someone get on a bird. I love it.
That's awesome. And I noticed someone else put in the chat about the next session in this series. Yeah, so the next session, the next interview in this series will be on the first Tuesday of every month until March. The next one is Tuesday I don't even know what the date is, whatever the first Tuesday is. I'll be interviewing Jerry Berrier, and he is a birder who's been birding since the 70s. He's totally blind and has been since birth, and he's got some really cool tips, some really cool stories, some really, really important insights, and it'll be really great to chat with him and keep learning and about how sighted birders can be more welcoming and inclusive, and all kinds of things like that. So that's going to be great. We hope you'll join us for that session as well. Thanks so much, Virginia. It's been really awesome chatting with you. I'm really grateful that I get to chat with you every week.
Oh gosh, thank you, Freya.
Really wonderful to hear a bit more about your experiences, and thank you for sharing some of your story with the world.
Thank you for all you do, for your great questions, and for being the greatest coordinator ever.
This was wonderful. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Freya. It highlighted so much of how we can all benefit from learning more about these experiences. And yeah, benches for everyone. It really does help. Thank you to all of you who joined us too and stayed for a full 90 minutes of conversation. Freya, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we ended, or Virginia?
I think I squeezed in most things.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And
thank you, thanks folks for coming and for sharing your thoughts and experiences in the chat. Yeah, and don't forget, if you are a manual wheelchair user, we'd love to hear about your tricks and tips and advice in the survey that you'll get as soon as we finish. So please share with us so that we can share it with more people.
And thank you to Kathy and Melissa and Erica as well for all the help with this webinar. We really appreciate it. And we at ABC are so glad that you're here.